Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of the Right Discourse. The topic of our discourse today is Bolsonaro and Brazil. Brazil is the largest country of South American continent and is home to Amazon forest, which is the biggest rainforest of this world and a very large carbon sink for this whole planet. Jair Bolsonaro is 38th president of Brazil who served as a deputy for around 20 years in Rio de Janeiro, and he is a retired military captain, and the whole world is eyeing on Bolsonaro after he assumed office on 1st of January 2019. He is known for scuttling the progressive voices in educational institutions and suppressing the voices of dissent against his government. He is also having a very strong surveillance on professors and students who are protesting against him, and they are being charged for speaking against the incumbent government. Jair Bolsonaro is also very hostile towards the minorities of Brazil. He is all set to snatch all the protections and privileges given to the minorities of the Brazil by the previous governments. The world can also see a complete paradigm change in the policies of the international relations of Brazil under Bolsonaro, where he is moving farther and farther away from his old friends in the BRICS countries and Arab countries and moving closer to United States. Recently, it was in news that Brazil is open to shift its embassy to Jerusalem, and according to Bolsonaro, it was a matter of time and there is no question about it. So this is a candid, clear indication that how the international relations of Brazil could change under Bolsonaro. So today we have with us a very special guest in our show, Professor Elbe Marques Belardinelli, who is sitting in Brazil right now, and we are having an interview with him over Skype. Professor Elbe teaches philosophy and history in a public college in Brazil, and he is the director of CPERS Union, which is the Syndicate of Workers in Education Sector in Rio de Grande do Sul. Professor Elbe is also a very prominent social and political activist in Brazil. So let us welcome Professor Elbe in our show. Welcome Professor Elbe to our show, The Right Discourse.
Thank you, invitation for here.
Professor, how do you think about Bolsonaro's politics and his interference in Brazilian educational system and institutions? The kind of power struggle that is going on and the kind of control mechanism which he is applying on the educational institutions. What is your opinion regarding that?
This question is very important, what's happened in Brazil and these times. And I think dispute has really been happening in time in school and universities in Brazil. For we understand, we have to go back to history and make a reflection exercise. What does that mean? Go back in time and identify the process of disputes that has occurred in the last 30 years in Brazil with what we call that new republic. That is the open stage with the period of democratization, 1989, and 1216 with the fall of Dilma. And what we live today would be the end of this stage and the beginning of another. You understand?
Yes, of course.
In the last 30 years, we have had a constitution that tried to make class reconciliation and allowing more vulnerable sections of the subaltern classes to have a voice in the new republic. That is the state of social welfare, and the democratic pact broke with the rise of Bolsonaro. With the fall of Dilma. So we have a pact broken. This process also occurs in education and school and university. Um, I will give you a practical example, and that happened with myself in the living skin.
Okay.
So I am persecuted in my school. Um
Okay.
exemplo, what a school with a party. What is it? It's a project of the law that tries to delimit and silence the teacher in the school. That is determines that you cannot make certain discussion, debates or discussion in the classroom. It's censorship and the end of the freedom of cathedra. That is the institution of the parents. We have complete control of the program and the way of teaching. This provoked a stronger resistance of the teachers, but also gave birth to the conservative sec- sectors to advance and to gain space in the school. It's an ideological struggle of hegemony. They are winning. So Bolsonaro model is even worse. It would be the military school model, but with little recourse. And it's a disaster. Uh, I think that I remains the workers with their unions and civil society make the resistance and not allow. It will be difficult, but we will give and we are giving the battle.
Exactly. All the best. All the very best, Professor, for that. The second question which I would like to ask you is, what is your opinion about the allocation of Amazonian forest to the industrialists, especially the people involved in the agribusiness or mining or for hydroelectric power or other industrial purposes? And what do you think would be the impact of that on pollution and environment? I also came to know that from 2017 till 2018, land as big as up to 1 million soccer field has been deforested. Do you think that Bolsonaro is more dangerous in his approach towards environment?
Yes, certainly. This process has come a long time. Even in the PT government with Lula and Dilma, it was happening, but slowly. It was not possible to advance much in this area as it is known that these governors were of class conciliation and it was also tied to agribusiness interest. So we had one control of the process. Now, uh, probably the things is changed. However, no things will get worse. For there is no longer the counterpoint and the space that social movements did. No, the trend is intensification of both deforestation and the proliferation of poisons. That is, the road is open to agribusiness and the consolidation of Brazil as a agro-exporting country and a producer of commodities. The, this the project.
Okay. Should we move to the third question? Teresa Cristina, who happens to be the agriculture minister in Bolsonaro's ministry, she is supposed to lead the agribusiness lobbying group in the Congress and is supposed to be the champion of deforestation. Do you think I also came to know that Bolsonaro was going to merge agriculture ministry with the environment ministry, but I think it was rumors, it did not happen. What do you think is the was the reason behind this merger, or what were the thinking behind this merger?
Okay, it's still early for finer, more accurate characterizations, but I believe the junction would show more vulnerability to the environmental issue. Of course, they had resistance, but I believe they are not very worried about it. The government of Bolsonaro and the minister herself are not concerned about the environment. They are worried to create the conditions so that the agribusiness make good business. That
Okay.
could be what the professor Plínio, the teacher Plínio de Arruda Sampaio from University of Unicamp said. It's happening in Brazil, a new colonial reversion, a return to the past, to the colonial past. This is a process of new colonial reversal. Brazil returned to be colon states of the world economy.
Yes, it seems very dangerous to me, Professor, and that was a very good point. Very good point by you. So let us move to the next question. What are the economic issues that Brazil is facing today?
Okay, the economy issue is as I said, I have a totally ultra neoliberal views. Fear was like in a relation to what's to come. Bolsonaro did not really show his economic plan in the electoral campaign. What represent of this government, Bolsonaro, is a civil military government with hegemony of the international financial oligarchy and the Brazilian judiciary with the media together. Together. This
Okay.
articulation of power intends to carry out the contradictions that we fear would not. They are intensifying the labor reform that's to destroy with the work. And we already see this with the change in the policies of increase of the minimum salary, precarious work stream, drastic reform of social security, and massive privatization of the extractive sectors, mainly the pre-sal. Need something else?
That's yeah, yeah. So, Professor Elbe, could you also talk a little bit about relation between Brazil and India?
That's an import question. Uh, so I gonna tell you about in the time of Lula and Dilma for
Sure,
example for
sure.
what make a comparison of what's gonna be. Uh,
Exactly.
we had a great diplomatic relationship and commercial advance with India. For things in India, we have to think the BRICS. The BRICS was a strategy arise on the initiative of Brazil and Lula principally, and with a vision of building alternative to hegemony of the United States and the Europe Union. This will be destroyed, finished.
Okay.
Brazil is once again aligned with the United States of America, and
Yeah.
once again is dependent and subordinate. I will give you just one example.
Okay.
Let's pick up the relationship between the two countries of the beginning of PT government from 2014. Commercial transactions grew from $1 billion to $10 billion,
Wow.
making the 13th largest trading partner in Brazil. It's only 10 years.
Good,
In
good.
other words, in uh, 2012, they set targets for raising these levels to close to five, $15 billion annually. There, Therefore, that strategic association I made a broadening trade, cultural and technological relation between the two countries. It's a risk, and I'm optimist because Bolsonaro is likely to end it.
So that's a very a very serious matter for India also and Indian diplomacy to think about it.
So, what mean Bolsonaro and context, mundial context, is that and the hegemony of the Union and States. So,
Right, hegemony of United States. That's what the world is also thinking about. So so let us move to next question, Professor. Do you think that Bolsonaro is making Brazil less democratic?
for sure. But it's worse than that. It's more complex.
Okay.
For him to do what he has to do, he will have to use force and silence the opposition. Understand?
Yes, yes.
And how would you do that? First, taking Lula out of the dispute and ending the biggest party of the Latin America's left, PT, together with the dismantling of unions and social movements. Example, MST, MTST, and others unions, all related to disputes by the ideological and the ideology
Yes.
hegemony. That's it's the point. That's one example. And the
Right.
WhatsApp social networks and school and school, obvious and civil society. And therefore, this new stage means qualitative change in Brazilian pseudo-democracy. If they have difficulties in implanting these ultra neoliberal policies, they will to implant a dictatorship with a vote. So that is all
Yes.
times. It's difficult times for us.
That's true. It's a very difficult time, and I can totally understand that. So let us move to another and the most important question of this show is that he said that minorities need to adapt to majorities or simply disappear, and not a single inch of land will be reserved for indigenous people. What do you think about this statement?
Okay, that's a part of your speech, your narrative.
Okay.
It's an old strategy already used in the military dictatorship in Latin America. or in fascism in Italy, or Nazism in Germany. Uh, what it's mean? Find an enemy and a possible enemy of the nation that can impede the progress and welfare of the family, etc. And minorities within Brazil are not minorities, are the chosen ones to be the enemies. The example of the Indian peoples is paradoxical uh, because they have to adapt. One example, Bolsonaro wants that they have to adaptate us Brazilians culture, soft of goods, the heterosexual and Christians, they cannot use land that could be produced and generate millions of agribusiness. So we have to change the logic. We have to change. The Indians are expropriated from their autochthon lands and work as a citizen of God. It is changing the Indians. Therefore, this is new stage goes beyond economy and political changes. It is a attempt of cultural ideological change, a setback of 200 years, in my point of view.
Yes. Finally, Professor Elbe, that was a good point from your side. And to my audience, I would like to say that by Indians, Professor Elbe meant the indigenous people of Latin America. So let us move to the next question. Finally, do you think that Bolsonaro is getting Brazil close to America?
Okay. Bolsonaro is worse than Trump. Huh? He is an unprepared man who, in the hands of the army and the other sectors of hegemonic power, can be very dangerous for Brazilian society, especially for the poor working class, or poor people. It's clear that a man who has been for more than 25 years as a deputy and never did anything besides talking nonsense and defining torture, dictatorship, military, criminal minorities, and others reactionary patterns. No finds in the presidential chair of the most important country in Latin America. Another question is that American democracy is different and Brazilian democracy. The mechanisms of control it's different. Trump does not do Trump does not do crazy. I know that Bolsonaro has radically changed Brazilian foreign policy, breaking with a tradition of more than 20 years in Brazil. Now Brazil is directly aligned with the USA and the Israel, leaving behind the BRICS and the direct relationship with China.
True.
So, and to finish, this whole process will occur with much resistance and struggle of the subaltern sectors, that's to say, of the Brazilian workers. Who lives will see.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Professor Elbe, for coming to our show and giving me time. You are directly connected from Brazil. I am very glad that you participated in our show. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for an invitation. It's very pleasure for stay with you.